Yes, yeah.
Yes,
Yes,
I've set
yes,
just
we
set it
are.
up now.
but we won't share the video until everyone's okay that we share the video.
I'm starting. That's okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. So who's not here? Richard Medhurst. I haven't heard from him recently.
We're letting everybody in now.
Yeah.
Okay.
We've
Are
still got
we?
people joining.
Yeah. Do I need to do anything to let them in, or are
No,
they?
they're all joining. If you look on the right-hand side, you can see the number of attendees.
It's
Yeah.
126 at the moment.
Just increasing as people enter the room. So it takes a while for everybody to be let in.
128.
So, in the meantime, I think we'll increase the time to a maximum of 10 minutes because Richard Medhurst is not with us. Is that okay?
Yeah.
With the panelist? Fine.
And hopefully Brank will be joining us.
Did he say he would be, or you didn't
Oh, he
know?
did. Yeah.
Okay,
When I invited him. I
So
just
just
hope he's
Richard.
remembered.
Okay. Maybe you can message him in the meantime, Tony.
I'll message.
People are still joining, so I'll wait. Everyone will start in about 2 minutes because people are still joining us.
I think we've stabilized the number now.
I can't remember what.
Okay.
What is the for Huda? What's your? I can't remember the name on Signal. Is Huda there?
Yeah, Huda's here.
Huda is there.
Yeah.
I'm here. I'm here. Tony.
Oh yeah. I'll
just message me on here.
People still joining, so we'll give it 1 more minute.
There's somebody with their hand up. It's Sebastian Locke. Sebastian put something in the chat about why you've raised your hand. The chat is open for everyone. Ah, okay. Thanks, Sebastian.
Okay. So that was an accident.
Yes.
Can you remove the hand, Sebastian? You have an option. Thank you very much. I think we are on 150, so I will start the meeting. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. We have a lot of speakers today, and I will allow a maximum of 10 minutes per speaker so that we have a Q&A, which is meaningful. This is a very important session. Most of the people on this session, including myself, have been arrested under the terror laws of 2000 that were updated. So we are talking about a group of people who have this terrifying experience of not just being arrested, but mostly also the police breaking in very early in the morning for the great crime of writing in support of Palestine and against the genocide. I have to also add before starting that Britain is totally on its own in doing what it is doing. No other country in Europe has a similar legislation, neither the US, and interestingly, not even Israel. So Britain has done the most to silence its population and remove human rights from its citizenship, all by someone who was supposedly a human rights lawyer and now is a devoted and committed supporter of the crimes that Israel is committing in Gaza. We have 7 speakers, I think, and we will allow each of them 10 minutes, after which there will be a Q&A session. We ask that you put your question in the Q&A in a sentence or two, so the panelists can see it and select which questions they want to answer. We also ask that you name the panelist to which the question is directed. Please don't ask general questions, because to ask 7 panelists to answer a question will take 15 or 20 minutes. We haven't got that time. So a question should be focused, short, to the point, and to a panelist. And the first speaker is Sukaina Rajwani, who is the mother of Fatima Zainab from the Filton 24 group. And she's she is on remand for decommissioning Elbit factories. I understand more than one. And she is part of a very large group who are sitting and waiting for their trials as terrorists, when they have not harmed a single person, nor did they mean to ever harm a single person. Sukaina, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. I am Sukaina Rajwani, and I am massively grateful to be here with you today and for the opportunity to share my daughter Fatima Zainab's story with all of you. Thank you so much, Tony, and to the organizers of the webinar for inviting me today. So over a year ago, on the 6th of August 2024, one day after her 20th birthday, my daughter Fatima Zainab was arrested on site at Elbit Filton, an Israeli arms manufacturer in Bristol, along with 5 other activists. They are accused of causing over £1 million worth of damage to weaponry, including damaging killer quadcopter drones. These drones are part of the weapons used in the genocide in Gaza, and these drones mimic the sounds of children in distress in order to draw civilians out to help, who are then shot at. My daughter Fatima Zainab has been in prison for over a year now without trial. 4 other individuals were rounded up from across the country in the following days by counter-terror police, some at gunpoint with their homes raided. All 10 were held in isolation without charge under the Terrorism Act for a week, after which they were then charged with criminal offenses that do not fall under the Terrorism Act. However, counter-terror police continue to lead the investigation, and the prosecution alleged that there is a terror connection linked to their case. In November 2024, last year, and more recently, just last month, a further 14 individuals were arrested by counter-terror police, some in violent nighttime raids by up to 30 officers in connection with the same case, making the original Filton now the Filton 24. All 24 have been imprisoned and on remand since their arrests, despite meeting all legal conditions for bail and having no incentive to skip. Fatma Zainab's bail has been rejected twice so far on the grounds that she is too committed to the Palestinian cause and will reoffend if granted bail. She has been in prison for daring to dissent against a genocidal arms trade without trial for 13 months now, when the legal custody time limit for prisoners on remand is 6 months. It makes you wonder about Britain's claims to freedom of speech and democracy and the right to protest when we see, especially now presently, hundreds of people arrested under counter-terror powers for opposing an ongoing live stream genocide. Unfortunately, today I cannot speak of how proud I am of my daughter for standing up for what's right and what's just, as I would then be at risk of supporting a proscribed organization, Palestine Action, with whom she took direct action with, and then face up to 14 years of jail time. But then I can tell you how proud I am of Fatima Zainab as a person. Fatima Zainab has a very compassionate soul, and one of her most defining characteristics is her passion for social justice. When the genocide started in October 2023, Fatima Zainab was at the time in her second year of media studies at Goldsmiths University. Fatima Zainab refused to remain silent. She refused to be complicit in the ongoing genocide in Gaza. She refused to look away. She participated in protests and marches week after week, as well as her university encampments for 10 months. Yet the government continued to arm Israel in the midst of an ongoing genocide. I believe it was then that she realized that peacefully protesting alone wasn't enough and that only direct action could make any difference. She has put everything on the line to stand with the oppressed. She would have been graduating this summer, actually next week, had she not been in prison with her studies. So we asked the question, why Elbit Systems? Elbit Systems UK is part of the multinational arms company, Elbit Systems Limited, headquartered in Haifa, occupied Palestine. It is Israel's largest weapons manufacturer, profiting from and enabling the Zionists' military regime, occupation, apartheid, and genocide of Palestine, supplying the Israeli military with 85% of their drones and land-based equipment and more. Their weaponry is often marketed as battle-tested, boasting how they used Palestinians as test subjects. Investigations by Declassified UK have shown us that Elbit facility in Filton, where Fatima Zainab was arrested at, was shipping arms to Israel during the ongoing genocide, in contravention of a UN arms embargo on Israel. They were, with the complicity of the British government, breaking international law. Fatima Zainab and the other Filton 24, with their alleged action, were upholding international law. In a letter to the UK, the United Nations has also condemned the unjust use of UK counter-terror laws against the Filton 24. The treatment of the Filton 24 is clearly intended to intimidate the public and to protect the Israeli arms trade in the UK. According to a recent investigation by Declassified UK, this crackdown on activists comes after a series of disturbing meetings between the UK Home Office, the police, Elbit Systems, and Crown Prosecution Service. It seems that the UK government has a personal interest invested in Elbit Systems, as they benefit from the arms trade and murder of innocent lives financially, as well as to push imperialistic policies across the globe. Britain has legitimized Israel's colonization project through the Balfour Declaration, and it continues to legitimize it through providing arms to Israel throughout the genocide. We have all heard of the British Ministry of Defence's plans to award a 15-year contract worth £2.5 billion to Elbit Systems in order to train the UK military. Is this what we really want? A genocidal arms company training our soldiers on our soil? On that note, we do have a campaign running to report Elbit Systems UK to the police for war crimes and for crimes against humanity. Please do support us in this campaign. I will add the necessary links in the chat after I finish speaking. So Fatima Zainab's trial is just around the corner. The Filton 24 trials have been divided across 4 trial groups over more than a year. The first group to go to trial includes my daughter Fatima Zainab, the original 6 that were arrested on site at Elbit. Their trial will be held at Woolwich Crown Court to start on 17th of November, and it is listed for up to 8 weeks. Please do support the Filton 24 in their upcoming trials by raising awareness and by mobilizing outside the court. Because, let me be clear, this is not just about the 24 activists that have been arrested. This is about everyone's freedom in the UK as we continue to slip into a police state. This is about the world we must stop sleepwalking into, normalizing mass slaughter, starvation, and suffering. We must stand together and fight together, for this is a fight we must win, from Britain to Palestine. Realize that you're not safe if you remain quiet. They're coming for us regardless. I would like to end with a quote from Audre Lorde's book called Your Silence Will Not Protect You. Because the machine will try to grind you into dust anyway, whether or not we speak. We can sit in our corners, mute forever, while our sisters and ourselves are wasted, while our children are distorted and destroyed, while our earth is poisoned. We can sit in our safe corners, mute as bottles, and we will still be no less afraid. Thank you so much.
Thank you very, very much, Sukaina, for this incredible presentation. I hope that you can give your courageous daughter. There are 200 people now listening to you, and by extension, listening to your daughter and what she and the other Filton people have done. We are all extremely proud of them and proud of you and your support for Fatima Zainab. Thank you very much. I'd like to introduce my co-chair, Esther. Could you take over, Esther, now?
Yeah, thank you very much, Chaim. I'd like to thank you as well, Sukaina, and your daughter for her tremendous courage. Thank you. Our next speaker will be known to many of you. We are going to hear from Mick Napier, who's chair of Scottish PSC. And Mick has also been subject to terrorism charges, and I think on numerous occasions there have been attempts to prevent him from protesting in Scotland and Glasgow and so forth. So welcome to our meeting, Mick. Over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Esther, and thanks to the organisers for this really timely and quality event. Those of us who are really old might have been involved in the campaign against the war in Vietnam, 3 million dead, aggression, genocidal violence. And the meetings were rather small for a very long time, until the university authorities in the USA banned meetings on the subject. And when the issue of free speech became fused with the issue of Vietnam, the movement grew by leaps and bounds. It really was a case of the war coming home, in the sense that it was activity on the ground in the USA and elsewhere that built the movement. But the free speech issue was absolutely central to building the movement against the genocidal invasion of Vietnam. And I think there's lessons there. What we're witnessing is Palestine becoming a major domestic political issue. Now, despite the suffering, my predecessor here spoke about the suffering of her daughter, long-term jailing. And I think these people are the exception to the general rule that the cost of resistance here in Britain is usually relatively minor. Harassment, fines, petty legal pressure, and so on. But this is the exception. And of course, we need to have the slogan, no one left behind, that we don't leave anyone behind. And it was a salutary lesson in this respect from way back in the massacre of 2009 cast lead. As I recall, there were very large angry demonstrations at the Israeli University, the Israeli embassy, sorry, in London, after which many of those who participated returned to normal life. Several months afterwards, they began to be picked up by the police and charged. And if my numbers are correct, I seem to recall that 14 young men were charged with various crimes, all bar one Muslims. And somehow the police managed to isolate them from each other. They didn't even know each other quite often, and persuaded them to plead guilty to the charges against them, promising that if they did so, they could avoid a custodial sentence. Their crimes were serious. It involved throwing a water bottle, a plastic water bottle that many people just put in the bin, against the gates of the Israeli embassy. They all got custodial sentences. And the problem was that because they were not organized together, they had been driven by rage at the Israeli crimes, a stronger defense campaign wasn't possible. So I think the lesson from that is if we begin to get involved in opposing the genocide, we better be organized and we better be working together to defend those who are in the crosshairs of the state. I've been charged with, for what it's worth, I've been charged with 3 counts of terrorism. The first one was allegedly supporting Hamas when I pointed out that Hamas won an election in Gaza in Palestine some years ago, and the British government tried to annul it. That was all. The terrorism charges were dropped after a couple of months when the prosecutors decided that it wasn't worth proceeding with. The current charges involve supporting 2 other terrorist organizations, Palestine Action, who it seems went too far. And I mean, although it was a genocide, they painted an aircraft. They used paint. And this terrible crime has led to them being classed as terrorists. Now, I think being charged with an offence that could lead to 14 years in prison, in my own case, it's always thought crime. I haven't smashed up an aircraft yet. 14 days would be serious. 14 weeks, I would really take very seriously indeed. But 14 years, this is absolutely off the scale of craziness. And a lot of people, the general public, see it. I saw a figure a few days ago that 71% of Labour Party members and supporters, even there, opposed the prescription on Palestine Action. So I think, in a sense, the tide is with us. We get a feeling over the last couple of months that when out campaigning on the streets, the mood has certainly changed. And not just Labour Party members, but right across the board, we see strong opposition to this prescription. And therefore, given that the issue of free speech is utterly fused with the issue of the genocide in Palestine, it creates the conditions for a successful fight back. So my 2 current charges of terrorism, one is for Palestine Action. I didn't have the courage to wear the Palestine Action t-shirt. We decided to fight on a slightly different hill, and we wore t-shirts that said genocide in Palestine, in big font, time to take action. And Palestine in Action were very prominent. From 10 feet away, it was about Palestine Action. The cops said that anyone who wore that t-shirt would be arrested. And I think this is really dumb on their part. I think they're going to lose. I decided to become a little bit satirical because I had a serious bail condition already. And I changed my t-shirt to say, time to act. So even the word Palestine wasn't on the t-shirt. Now, this isn't as ridiculous as plasticine action, but I think the way in which the cops are on such a hair trigger could very well contribute to their downfall, to their undoing going forward. So I guess one other thing to report from up here is that the reason why I think the tide is swimming in our direction is that although the police are still arresting all and sundry, knocks on the door at 1 o'clock in the morning, people being scooped off the street, scores of cops chased the playwright, Paul Laverty, close comrade of Ken Loach, a couple of days ago in Edinburgh, scores of them in order to arrest them. And this makes them look ridiculous. But the the authorities up here seem to be having second thoughts. The cops are going full tilt, but the legal authorities have frozen all the prosecutions for the moment. Those people who had bail conditions, being banned from the city centre, for example, and a date to appear in court, they've been told in writing that they have not yet decided whether to prosecute, and there's no date to appear in court, forget about it, and there are no bail conditions. So just get on with your normal life. So it seems that, and the authorities have set up a special condition. They've reined in the prosecutors, who up in Scotland really need to be reined in. I mean, I've spent years in court charged with the terrible crime of saying the words "end the siege of Gaza," or in another case that lasted 3 years, talking about Palestinian blood, which was deemed to be anti-Semitic. So the prosecutors up here have a long history of mounting absolutely crazy prosecutions, which never really had any chance of success, but took years. But now they've been reined in, and the government has set up a system whereby a very senior prosecutor has to okay every prosecution, and that, so not the ordinary men and women in the offices, but even that prosecutor is to be supervised by a special committee of experts. I don't know if it's 3 or 5, but that committee of experts will be, they'll be needed to endorse any prosecution that relates to Palestine action, and I think terrorism accusations in general. So on the one hand, the cops are not slowing down at all. Every time they arrest people for a T-shirt, they ban them from the city centre. But as soon as that goes in front of a sheriff, that bail condition is vaporized. It's cancelled. And at the same time, the authorities are really having second thoughts. One other thing that seems to me to have changed things up here is that we managed a couple of weeks ago to force, very much against his will, he held out for 22 months of genocide, but we forced the First Minister up here, John Swinney, who's a terrible record of anti-Palestine and pro-Israeli activism, but with a few emollient words to try and cover it. He has now started to criticise the Israeli genocide, call it genocide, and damn it in no uncertain terms. That hasn't stopped the Scottish Government continuing with investments in arms companies that facilitate the genocide. So I think we've got a bit of a crisis of will, of confidence in some of the authorities up here that suggest that the level of defiance, absolutely, above anywhere else emanating from London, but the level of defiance is giving them pause for thought. And I think that's the main point I would take away from the last few weeks, the last couple of months. That if we organise, if we are determined, if we stick together, if we try to maximise the numbers of people acting in defiance, then I think there's a real strong possibility of winning. Over the last 22 months of genocide, a lot of people have been active, they've been out on the streets, but there's been terrible depression. There's been a feeling that whatever we do, the terrible crimes just get even worse and worse and worse. Now I think we can begin to see the possibility of breaking this government's will, of mounting a sufficiently strong campaign of defiance on this issue that we can actually win this one. So I hope I'm sure this webinar tonight will be a contribution towards that. But having been on trial for 17 of the last 19 years, having been on bail for 17 of the last 19 years, we tend to win. And you win when you're determined and you fight back. To sit in the sheriff courts is to see a procession of broken people, working class people who just get processed, and they don't have the opportunity or the ability to fight back. But we do. And when we fight back, we have every chance of winning. And I say this, of course, only facing only ever having been in jail for a few days or a few weeks, and not facing the terrible isolation and jail time of some of the Palestine Action comrades. But their determination is not in vain. They are inspiring people. They're inspiring lots of people. The numbers are having deteriorated over the 22 months, numbers at demonstrations and events are beginning to grow. And I think there is an awareness now that to repeat some of what the previous speaker said, that Starmer can't ignore a bloody war. That he is so monstrous and such a monstrous figure that the issue of Palestine is not just fused with free speech, but it's fused with the wider war, the wider appetite for war by this government, and the catastrophe that's been visited upon the people of Gaza and Palestine. A lot of people are beginning to think could be visited upon many people, perhaps even including ourselves. So when we fight for the Palestinians, we fight for ourselves. And I look forward to listening to the other speakers in this excellent webinar.
Thank you very much, Mick. There are now more than 205 people listening to this, which is excellent. I just want to ask you a technical question that has arisen, Mick, before we start the next one, and that is: are the terror laws in Scotland synchronized with those in London, or are they different in any way?
They're pretty much the same. The behaviour is different. Some of our people, I was very surprised to learn down in England, they get put on bail without even being charged. That's not possible up here. So the legal systems are separate, but there isn't a huge difference between them.
Well, I think what you described is the result of the total mess that the system is in, and the confusion that they have sown themselves. Our next speaker is Richard Medhurst, who needs no introduction, one of the leading journalists in Britain, who was arrested, of all places, in the airport. Indeed, this was followed by further erosion of his right, both as a citizen and as a journalist. He has not been silenced. He will, I'm sure, not be silenced. And thank you for coming today and joining us, Richard.
Hi, thanks for having me. And you guys can hear me all right?
Yes.
Perfect.
Okay. Thank you, Mick and Haim, for your input and introduction. It's funny what Mick just mentioned about in Scotland you can't be on bail if you haven't been charged, because that's literally my situation. So I've been on bail now for just over a year. So I was arrested August 15th last year, and they've moved the bail 3 times already. So they released me on, because in England we have police bail and court bail. So I'm on police bail, and that means I have to come back to the police station at Heathrow. And they moved it from November 15th to February 15th to May 15th. And then in May, the police sent my file. So rather than drop the investigation, they sent my file to the Crown Prosecution Service. So then they extended the bail by 6 months instead of 3. So it's November 5th or 15th. I'm not entirely sure, because usually it should be 15th, but I was told it's a 5th. In any case, that's where it is right now. And honestly, I mean, I don't know what their strategy with that is, because in the beginning I thought it was just bad luck. But when they raided me and detained me in Austria, and then they escalated it to membership of a terrorist organization, I thought that's just there's something very, very wrong going on here. And there's also so as far as I know, because we were just talking about all these people that have been arrested for their placards with Palestine Action. I don't know if the number is still correct. I think it's 500 people. It's at least 500. It used to be 500 about a few weeks ago. So it's probably more now, which is absolutely insane. But as far as I know, I'm still the only journalist that was hit with Section 12. And so, I mean, in both cases, whether you're just a regular civilian who's not a journalist, or you are a journalist, it's a free speech issue either way. I think we should really focus on hammering that message home, because that's really what it comes down to. Whether you're writing an article or you're protesting, it does remain a free speech issue. And the other thing as well, is that in my cases with Reaper, I don't know if any of you guys have been hit with that as well. They made me sign a Reaper notice before I was allowed to leave the police station. So that one is very egregious because it can turn into its own case, even if they drop the terrorism stuff. I wouldn't be surprised at all if they've done it with people they've arrested. So basically, Reaper is this. I think it's Regulatory Investigative Powers Act from the year 2000, and it's basically you go to prison if you don't give them your password. The police have to go and get a court order from a judge. They didn't do that with me, but they kept asking for it, and then I got raided in Austria. So I don't know if those two are related, and they never asked me for the password since. So I don't know if those two are related, but I wouldn't be surprised. But that is very, very egregious because they can drop the terrorism stuff and then still send you to jail just for not giving them your phone password, which is unbelievable. There are lawyers that are actually in prison in the UK. You'll forgive me now; I don't remember their particular names right now, but there's no respect under the Terrorism Act or Reaper for attorney-client privilege or doctor-patient confidentiality or journalists and their sources. It really is. It's already fascist, the law, and they've kind of just expanded upon it, and it's very, very, very egregious and horrible. And I think you've also been paying attention, all of you, to this Online Safety Act. The Home Office have also been asking Apple for this backdoor for them to access iCloud user data. So when we talk about just now about what we can do to amplify the struggle and fight, my specialty, what I can do is help with cybersecurity. I think that's I never talked about this issue before I got arrested because I didn't want to make it easier for them to know what devices I have. But this is something I can help with. So anyone who needs or wants to know more can just approach me, email me. I'm more than happy to help. And I think it's very relevant for people that are being targeted by the state, for journalists, for activists. And we should remember that what they're doing is actually illegal. Spying on your own citizens is by definition illegal, no matter what kind of label they try to slap on it. It's got nothing to do with national security. It's just straight up fascism. So that's something I can contribute and help people with gladly. And I'm all ears on how we can also help expand the message to the broader public, because I know that more and more people are waking up to this, and it's very inspiring seeing people coming out every weekend with the protesting against the Terrorism Act and so on. But I feel like we still haven't. There's just a bit more to kind of penetrate into the mainstream media, because they're still trying to. I don't know if they're doing it on purpose or it's a D notice that's been served to them. I don't know what it is, but they're still. They're obviously playing to the tune of the government, so we don't want to let them get away with that. I think we need a bit more media penetration, and we're almost there. I don't know if you guys would agree with me, but whatever we can do, I'm all ears, and I'm very grateful for this webinar and for all of you putting this together and coming out. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Richard. There are a lot of things there that I think were really, really interesting. So your point about media penetration, clearly, I'm sure I'm not the only one to have been extremely frustrated by the lack of media challenge to the current situation. Really appreciate your offer regarding cybersecurity. Also, interestingly, and your point about spies, and my observation that the Labour Party has very clearly, explicitly and proudly recruited Israeli spies to its ranks, previously to spy on members. So it seems to me that the Labour Party is now doing to the country what it was initially doing to its members. And I noticed a comment in the chat as well, as part of during Richard's talk, that the whole of the UK should be in this meeting because it's offering so many insights to the current situation. So thank you to our speakers so far. And our next speaker requires hardly any introduction at all. Huda Amori is speaking to us next. And you'll all know Huda as an activist and campaigner targeting British complicity with Israeli apartheid and genocide. And we're really pleased you can be with us tonight, Huda. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, and thank you for organising this event. So I'm sure everyone is aware of the current situation with Palestine Action, but just to give some context, Palestine Action started in July 2020 with the aim of taking direct action against the Israeli weapons industry in Britain, specifically against Elbit Systems, Israel's biggest weapons firm. And from action to action, we continue to grow with more people joining and shutting down Elbit's weapons factories across the country. And with this came a lot of victories, and we managed to, in those 5 years, permanently shut down 3 Israeli weapons sites in Britain and force over a dozen companies to cut ties with Elbit. And Elbit lost contracts worth billions of pounds during that time. I think it's safe to say that we annoyed a lot of powerful people during the past 5 years, and I guess as well it shows the effectiveness of the campaign to see what strong reaction we garnered from the state. But it's quite important to note those people that we annoyed, because as well as the Elbit Systems, the Israeli weapons industry, people in Palestine Action also targeted Teledyne, a US weapons manufacturer who make parts for missiles in Bradford and send them over to Israel. And we know that so-called Lord Richard Dannett was paid by Teledyne, and he also called for the prescription of Palestine Action. And Elbit Systems and the Israeli government over the years had constant meetings with government ministers, with very senior police officers, counter-terrorism officers, and people in the CPS and the Attorney General's office, constantly discussing how to crack down on Palestine Action. And at first, this started with making it harder for us to have defences in court when we argued that our actions were not criminal, because we were acting to prevent the much greater crime and to stop weapons being made which would be used to massacre people in Palestine. When that failed to work and failed to stop us from taking action, they increased the number of raids, and then they started to remand more people in prison before trial. Then they started to use counter-terrorism powers, locking up the Filton 24 under counter-terrorism powers. And then when that didn't work, they resorted to prescription. And they have done an absolutely, what they call unprecedented move against all of our civil liberties in order to protect the Israeli weapons industry at a time when it is committing genocide in Gaza. And I think it's important to note that there are 29 prisoners, 24 of which are the Filton prisoners, 5 of which are connected to the Bryce Norton action. I know that's been mentioned before, but it's important to note that it is not a first for people to break onto British military bases and intervene with military aircraft, which would be used in wars. It was done during the Iraq War, and even before that against nuclear weapons. It's nothing new. The only difference this time is that it was done for Palestine, and it's the first time that they called it terrorism. 5 people are now in prison for that action, accused of terrorism for that. And not with Palestine Action, but another group took action against a weapons factory in Wolverhampton, and 4 of them have now been remanded to prison, not under counter-terrorism. But I think it's very important to note that all of the prisoners, 33 people in prison, 33 people in this country are in prison for taking action against genocide. All of them, every single one of them, has not gone to trial. Some of them face up to 2 years before they even go to trial. And I think that speaks volumes to the fact that actually when people go to trial, often people are acquitted, or they're not sentenced to prison. So they've resorted to punishing people before they can even be proven innocent or guilty in the eyes of the state. But this prescription has been a complete attack on not just Palestine Action, but across the whole movement. We've all seen people being arrested for plasticine action t-shirts. I think that's my favorite one so far. The private eye jokes, and these ridiculous things, being stopped for having a Palestine flag and harassed by the police. But also it has been incredible to see hundreds of people, and probably thousands to come, getting out there in the streets, holding placards and opposing the prescription, defying the law, in order to stand up for what is right, because this is completely unprecedented. And if we allow this to happen, then it's already so bad that if we don't fight back now, I can't even imagine how much worse it could get. I saw an action by a complete separate group that's been going for over a year against a right-wing think tank, Policy Exchange, very, very dodgy people there. And they just threw red paint, and yes, they smashed a window. And we have Lords, members of the House of Lords and MPs saying that is an act of terrorism. It's just become completely insane, where they're completely demeaning what the legality and the legal threshold of what it means to commit terrorism, and basically any effective opposition to the status quo, to the British state's involvement in genocide, they are now trying to classify as terrorism. And that is a sign of a very authoritarian state, of a police state completely. But at the same time, seeing how many people are coming out, I don't think Yvette Cooper, I know she didn't, because I've seen the documents. She did not expect this to happen. They did not expect such a strong backlash. And it is going to make this, the people resisting this and fighting back against this is going to make this completely unworkable. And it's only through mass resistance that we can get them to backtrack on this. There is the judicial review, but I do believe it's going to be massively reliant on the political campaign to fight against this prescription. And, we just have to remember that as this is happening, as they try and stop a group from shutting down Israeli weapons factories, these weapons are being used to massacre more and more people every single day in Palestine. And that is the urgency here. Those factories have got to be shut down. It's completely degrading to the Palestinian people to say that the people who are trying to stop those weapons being made are the terrorists, not the ones committing it. But I do believe that we will win. It's just a matter of time, and we've just got to, work together against this fascism and push back.
Thank you, Hoda, for an excellent presentation. The voice of Palestine Action will not be silenced. I want to tell you that a group called Palestine Action in Vienna has acted in exactly the same fashion that Huda and her friends have taught us is possible, justified, and necessary. And they were not arrested. They were not charged with anything. They gave many interviews. This is Vienna, where Zionism has once started, and also where Hitler comes from. So it's possible to speak openly against the crimes and against arming the crimes in Europe, but it's not possible in this country. In this country where the Zionist project was first supported 110 years ago. I'm going to ask now Frank McGuinness to speak to us. Frank is a barrister at Garden Court Chambers, very active on human rights and on this campaign. And his voice is often heard by all of us on social media. Frank, you know that a number of issues which are touching on legal rights have been raised here. I hope you can relate to them. And you probably also know that a very large group of us who were arrested under terror charges are taking the police to court for wrongful arrest. I hope you can relate to this, and I'm sure there will be a lot of questions from the audience. Frank, the mic is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me. And it's vital, of course, that we continue to create these kind of explicitly anti-Zionist spaces to do what we can to organize and to stand in solidarity with Palestinians as they face this ongoing genocide, almost 2 years now. I was going to talk to you about three things. I was going to share some thoughts on the Terrorism Act 2000. Secondly, I was going to talk about contemporary Zionism and its relationship to contemporary fascism. And then thirdly, I was going to try and outline or sort of sketch a strategy for taking legal, political, and cultural action, sort of designing offensive actions against the racist, arguably fascist ideology of Zionism. So starting with the Terrorism Act 2000, I've become increasingly familiar with it. I've been instructed by a particular client to bring an application under Section 4 of the Terrorism Act, calling for the Islamic resistance movement in Palestine to be removed from the list of banned organizations. And it does seem as though, because of the actions of Palestine Action in particular, that act, that specific piece of legislation finds itself in a crisis. I've spoken previously in various forums about the origins of that legislation. Its precursor legislation comes to us from the occupied north of Ireland. And I don't want to centre Ireland too much, but I do think that we learn something about studying the history of these powers and the fact that they were explicitly created to deal with the problem of anti-colonial resistance. So there's a common thread there that I think is worth dwelling on, and it's worth looking at the tactics that were deployed in the Irish struggle against British imperialism when thinking about how we can forge a winning strategy today. I think it would be better to avoid reinventing the wheel. And I think if you look at, for example, the comrades in Derry, they've been extremely militant in showing their solidarity with Palestine Action. And we learned something about why is it that people in the north of Ireland seem to have such sharp politics in this area. And the obvious answer is that we have spent hundreds of years really fighting against this British Empire. I don't want to be too critical of Corbyn. There's a whole discussion taking place right now about this new party that's being formed. But I do think some comradely criticism is useful. Broadly, it does seem as though we're witnessing a political revolution. And it's to be hoped that the Terrorism Act 2000 can be swept up in that political revolution and abolished, right? And I'm here to suggest that that should be our political demand, beyond specific demands relating to individual groups that are caught up in the dragnet of the Terrorism Act 2000. In my opinion, we should be calling for that piece of legislation to be abolished entirely. We should be loudly proclaiming that. We should be thinking strategically about how to create a campaign calling for the abolition of the Terrorism Act 2000. But, you know, Corbyn was put on the spot in a recent interview in Middle East Eye, I think it was. And this came in the wake of Zara Sultana MP saying that she was an anti-Zionist. And he gave what I thought was quite a confused answer about the IHRA definition. She had suggested that he had capitulated to Zionists by passing that definition in the Labour Party. I think he could have given a more principled and a sharper answer 23 months into a genocide that's being animated by Zionism. So I think we all need to be much more principled about our opposition to Zionism. And it's to be hoped that those MPs, those left-wing MPs, those now explicitly anti-Zionist MPs, can be won over to explicitly saying that the Terrorism Act 2000 should and could be abolished. I also think it's been disappointing. I represent Hamas under the Terrorism Act. They've asked me to make an application, me and my colleagues, to make an application calling for them to be deprescribed. It's disappointing to me that no mainstream politicians that I'm aware of have yet come out in support of that application. I think that's necessary. I think that if you look at the Irish Republican politicians, Sinn Féin and so forth, these politicians who rightly or have decided to pursue a strategy of so-called abstentionism, right? Run for election in constituencies in the north of Ireland and then refuse to take their seats because they don't recognise the legitimacy of the British colonial parliament. Mm-hmm. I mean, that organisation was attacked by similar legislation, right? Sinn Féin, Provisional IRA, they were attacked by this sort of mechanism trying to delegitimise people who win elections. It would be better if some of those politicians stuck their head above the parapet and said, you know what, we saw this in the north of Ireland and it was an obstacle to peace. We see this in Palestine, it's an obstacle to peace. It is worth noting that Section 4 says that, quote, an application may be made by A, the organization, or B, any person affected by the organization's prescription. And it goes on, but broadly, I think that's interesting as a matter of strategy and tactics. Anyone can make an application under the Terrorism Act. And I think it's a tactical mechanism that's been underutilized. Like, more of us could be just making applications saying, you know what, I'm affected by this prescription. I want to talk about peace in Palestine. I want to talk about what's going on in Lebanon with Hezbollah, whatever it might be, and just putting in applications and forcing this genocidal, racist British government to explain itself. And there's a right of appeal under Section 5 to the Prescribed Organisation Appeals Commission. So the government is forced to defend itself. So I think we should be bolder about bringing such applications and about, as I've said, making the broader political demand that, look, this piece of legislation needs to be abolished entirely. The definition of terrorism in Section 1 of the Terrorism Act is staggeringly broad. And it's perhaps unsurprising, but no less disturbing and authoritarian that the current British government has decided to wield that piece of legislation to attack the comrades in Palestine Action. The second thing I was going to talk about was Zionism and contemporary fascism. It seems to me that we cannot be under any illusions about what we are witnessing. We are witnessing the emergence of a 21st century fascism. We see that around the world. We see the morbid symptoms in various contexts. You have this Hindutva movement in India. You have the disturbing sort of attempted putsch by Donald Trump when he was previously president, just January 6th, right? Assault on the institutions of liberal democracy. You see it in Ireland, you see it in France, you see it around the world, in short, right? Fascism is on the rise. We know that contemporary fascism seems to cohere around trying to cultivate the acceptable hatred of the migrant, the figure of the migrant. See that in this country. And the figure of the migrant is often racialized as Muslim. So Islamophobia seems to be extremely integral to contemporary fascism. I also think it's extremely disturbing the way that so many contemporary fascists, not all of them, but most contemporary fascists seem to engage in what's sometimes called philo-Semitism, right? This kind of obnoxious claim to care about Jews, right? The contemporary fascist tends to say, we care about Jews. And so they get to advance this absurdly contradictory claim that they're somehow simultaneously fascist and think that, you know, Muslims should be rounded up and deported and put in camps and all the rest of it. But at the same time, they claim to be the true anti-racists because they're fighting against what they say is anti-Semitism. So I think we need to study this seriously. I think our enemies in the fascist, the apartheid state of Israel, the Zionist entity, as it's often called by Palestinians, it's clear that they are fascists. Bezalel Smotrich is obviously the finance minister, very senior minister in the fugitive of international law, Benjamin Netanyahu's government. So he's a fascist, right? Smotrich tells us that he's a fascist. He doesn't pretend to be anything other than that. We have evidence of Ben Gvir, who's a settler, handing out machine guns to settlers, right? So fascism, sometimes characterized as having a street movement. It's clear that Zionist fascism has a street movement. Like, there's a very close relationship between the sitting government and irregular forces, the irregular military force of the settler movement. It's also the case that the Zionist entity, Zionism as an ideology, has always defined the nation in explicitly racist terms. And so it seems to me that we should be at least posing the question rigorously, asking, what does it mean to suggest that Zionism is a fascist ideology, and arriving at robust, reasoned conclusions as to whether or not Zionism is inherently fascist, or whether it has become fascist, and certainly thinking about what it means to organize a strategy that can successfully defeat the fascism that we're witnessing in the Zionist entity. I think that we can do that in court, and it's not that difficult to do in court. In particular, people will be familiar with David Miller's case. What was being said in David Miller's case was an argument about whether or not his views qualified for protection under the Equality Act, right? So he professed anti-Zionist philosophical convictions, and he successfully showed that his views were worthy of respect in a democratic society. That's the test, right? In my opinion, we should be flipping that. We should be going into court and saying Zionism is a fascist ideology. Even if we can't persuade the court of that it's inherently fascist, we can certainly persuade the court that it's inherently racist, that it's colonial, that it's engaged in racial segregation, that it's the official ideology of an apartheid regime. All of these are relatively liberal arguments. It's not difficult to make them. And so we should be making what the lawyers will recognize as an Article 17 argument. So going into court and saying the European Convention has a so-called abuse clause that says when people try to use the rights of this convention to attack other people's rights, then they should lose the protection of the convention. and we should be saying that that is that test is clearly satisfied with almost, if not all, Zionist views. Zionism is a fascist ideology. It's the ideology of an apartheid state. It's not compatible with democracy. It's a profoundly anti-democratic project. So we should normalize anti-Zionism. And in particular, we should be clear that we are all anti-fascist, that Zionism is fascist, or it has at least become fascist. And for that reason, we are all anti-Zionist now. So we should be normalizing the idea that anti-Zionism is the only position to hold. And the only alternative is to side with fascists. The third thing I was going to say briefly, I don't want to take too much time. I said I would say a few words sketching a strategy for legal, political, and cultural offensive actions against Zionism. I've already touched on the legal. I just think that we should go on the offensive. I think Zionism is extremely weak right now. It's not capable of defending itself. You ask the average person on the street in a country, even like Britain, what do you think of Zionists? And most of them will tell you, oh, what, the people who bomb hospitals and murder children. And everyone, like the ordinary people, have just turned decisively against the Zionist project. So I've outlined some legal stuff already. We should go into court and just call a spade a spade. These guys are fascists. They tell us they're fascists. This ideology is profoundly undemocratic and incompatible with human rights, all the rest of it. I think we should go on the offensive. Some people have spoken about suing the police for arresting them. In my opinion, we should be pleading what's called aggravated damages, right? So the section of the pleadings where, when we're suing the police, we should say, look, you arrested me. The arrest was unlawful for all the kind of normal liberal reasons. And then we should add aggravated damages sections to our pleadings where we say, we can't understand your decision to arrest me without understanding that the British state has a long-standing policy of support for the colonial project of Zionism. We know that because the British Empire literally administered the Palestine Mandate. We know that from the Balfour Declaration. Like, there's no basis for denying that the British state is thoroughly Zionist as a matter of policy. And that is why you are engaged in all of this unlawful arresting of people who attempt to challenge your policy of Zionism while you commit a genocide. We should just go into court and say all of that and say your decision to arrest me was aggravated by the fact that you are currently participating in a genocide. And increasingly, I find myself doing that in the cases on which I'm instructed. When people are defending themselves against so-called regulatory prosecutions, we should turn prosecutions of individual professions, right? Doctor or a lawyer or someone who's facing criticism from their professional regulator because they took to social media to criticize the fascist ideology of Zionism while it commits a genocide. We should simply turn those cases around and say, the British state has no business to lecture anyone on how to avoid racism. You are engaged in this genocide. It's not merely that the Zionist entity is doing it. You're doing it. You're running spy flights. You're selling bombs and military equipment. You're running diplomatic cover. You're involved in the mass murder of Palestinians because you view them as a racial threat. You have no authority to criticize my client for doing some tweets. Like, my client may have tweeted some stuff. At least he didn't murder any Palestinian children. More or less going into court and saying that stuff. As to cultural spaces, I just think it's kind of low-hanging fruit, and I'm surprised we haven't seen more of it. Some spaces have sprung up, but I think we should be organizing film nights, like find relatively mainstream cinemas and just say, right, once a month we want to organize an anti-Zionist film screening of XYZ, screen the Battle of Algiers, get ideas from other anti-colonial resistance struggles, create museums. I was very inspired by the Museum of Neoliberalism, brilliant, blistering critique of neoliberalism. We should just create the Museum of Zionism, and people can just show up and educate themselves about what Zionism is. So anti-Zionist chess clubs, like anti-Zionist football clubs. We should just normalize the idea that anti-Zionism is akin to or is of a piece with anti-fascism. And as for politics, I mean, I defer to the people who are more actively engaged in the expressly political struggle. I often find that I feel a bit exhausted with witnessing the genocide, and I feel a pronounced sense of survivor's guilt. Like, I live in London, which is very safe, and I just don't really understand why I should be so safe when all my comrades in Palestine are being murdered like this. But it seems to me that we are witnessing a political revolution. You see that with Zoran Mamdani in New York. You see that with, Zara Sultana and the emergence of anti-Zionism as a mainstream parliamentary political force. So we should continue to deepen the crisis of Zionism and come together in spaces like this to come up with a strategy by which we smash Zionism. We smash Zionism because we smash fascism, and we smash fascism because the alternative is to allow the fascists to win. And I don't want to live on a planet where the fascists win. So we just got to keep picking ourselves up, finding more strategic ways to fight more effectively until Zionism is defeated entirely and the apartheid state of Israel is dismantled and replaced with a democracy.
Thank you, Frank. Smash Zionism, smash fascism, bravo. And I can see a comment from a comrade in chat. This is an excellent presentation, one of the best I've heard. This really goes to the jug there, bravo. So thank you very much, Frank. There are numerous questions that we'll come back to. in the Q&A. Our final speaker, however, this evening, before we go to questions, is Tony Greenstein. Whether you all know Tony as an activist for Palestine and an author of the book Zionism During the Holocaust, also a member of Jewish Network for Palestine. So, Tony, the closing speech is over to you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Esther. It has indeed been a really wonderful webinar in so many ways, and we've heard from such excellent speakers that I feel cast in the shadows. I was particularly interested by what Frank said about Ireland and the support for Palestine in Ireland, because I did a mini tour last year to Cork, and I was quite overwhelmed really by the support of Irish people for the Palestinians. And that is not surprising because, of course, the history of the establishment of the Israeli state and the mandate in Palestine closely followed the partition of Ireland. Both occurred in the early 1920s, and both were under Winston Churchill, who was then the colonial secretary. And it was Sir Ronald Storrs, who was the first British military governor of Jerusalem, who I think summed it up when he said about Zionism that it was one that blessed him that gave as well as him that took, by forming for Israel a little loyal Jewish Ulster in the sea of hostile pan-Arabism. And really, that summed up everything about the British attitude, because, I mean, people often associate, when they hear the word Zionism, they often associate it with Jews. And there are many in the Palestine solidarity movement even who are unable to distinguish between Jews and Zionism. But the history of Zionism is that the British and the imperialists adopted Zionism well before Jewish people did. It was Palmerston and Lord Shaftesbury in 1840 and 1842 who urged the Jewish Board of Deputies, which today is really just a Zionist lobby organisation, to agree to the Jewish return to Palestine. And the Board of Deputies and many other Jewish organisations rejected that because their main aim was to achieve emancipation, which occurred in Britain in 1858. The last thing they wanted was to be told that they were really an alien people who were destined to return to what was their original homeland in Palestine. Christian Zionism preceded Jewish Zionism by 4 centuries, and it was no accident that in 1917, when the Balfour Declaration was agreed by the Lloyd George War Cabinet, that the only member of that cabinet to vote against the Balfour Declaration was its only Jewish member, Sir Edwin Montagu. But of course, all these things disappear down a memory hole, and they're not remembered. They disappear from history altogether. And indeed, up to the Second World War, the majority of Jews in the diaspora, not least in Poland, which had 3.3 million Jews, was overwhelmingly anti-Zionist. And I don't think people should forget that, because today we see, of course, the Metropolitan Police Commissioner rerouting Palestine solidarity marches in order to protect Jewish worshippers at synagogues. And if you believe that, you believe anything. Jews today are used as a moral alibi for Zionism and for the genocide in Palestine, but they are not the cause. The cause, of course, is the imperialist interests themselves. And we've heard from Huda and others about the attacks on our democratic rights. I mean, all I really have to say about that is that democratic rights such as freedom of speech, freedom of association, the right to demonstrate, were not given to us on a plate by our legislators or the judges, they were fought for. There is nothing new in today's attack on free speech. The Chartists, trade unions, the suffragettes, they all experience the same attacks. And people like William Cobbett, Richard Carlyle, Thomas Paine even, the theoretician of the American and French revolutions, they were all attacked and they all suffered imprisonment at one time or another. So when we're told that it's the rule of law, I think we can treat that with a certain contempt and disdain. Our ruling class has always had a disregard for democratic rights if it could get away with it. And the fact that we have freedom of speech, albeit now limited freedom of speech, is because of those past struggles. Britain is wedded, of course, to the United States. Ever since Suez, its foreign policy has, in essence, been that of the United States. And given that the United States has its client state, Israel, its settler attack dog, if you like, in the Middle East, it's no accident that Britain keeps as close as it can to everything that the United States does foreign policy wise. So we saw that, for example, only a couple of days ago. Russia attacked Ukraine, 21 people were killed, others were injured. And immediately David Lammy summoned the Russian ambassador to see him. It's a way of expressing your disapproval diplomatically. And yet thousands have died, children, women, starved to death in Gaza. And there's not a hint that David Lammy is going to summon the Israeli ambassador, Tzipi Hotovely, a complete religious nut, incidentally, to see him, despite the protestations of Lammy and even Starmer that they disapprove of Israel. When it comes down to it, they really want to do nothing to offend their attack dog apart from pious words, token sanctions on Smotrich and Ben Gvir and a few key settlers in the West Bank. But nothing that Israel does could possibly affect what is in essence a special relationship. And we've seen that with the international law, the complete shredding of international law, such that the United States is now sanctioning the court, the International Criminal Court itself, and the chief prosecutor. And there's apparently a Mossad team alive and well somewhere in the Netherlands, tracking down Karim Khan, the prosecutor. What we see is Trump and his administration behaving like mafia bosses, seeking to take out the courts and the judges when the law goes against them. So international law has been rendered almost totally useless because it has no enforcement mechanism. I mean, this is not surprising, of course. The same happened with Nicaragua when America mined its ports back in the 1980s. But it's just a reminder, really, of the kind of system we live in, that beneath the democratic facade lies, in essence, a capitalist dictatorship. And we should not forget that. I should mention, I guess, my own arrest. In fact, I was arrested twice. The first time was in December the 20th, 2023, a dawn raid by about a dozen police. We have a situation, incidentally, in Britain where rape has been virtually decriminalised. The police don't have enough resources to investigate it. But when it comes to so-called anti-terrorism, the police have unlimited resources. There's absolutely no problem in squads of them touring the country, seeking out to arrest Palestine solidarity activists. But that's the nature, if you like, of the justice system. So I was on bail, first police bail and then court bail. And my trial will be in January at Kingston Crown Court, one of the 3 courts in the south which can try terrorism offences. And it's absolutely clear that the anti-terrorism laws are being used to suppress free speech on Palestine. What they have nothing to do with is actually combating terrorism itself. I mean, we all know what terrorism is. When you plan to bomb at a concert hall in Manchester, the Manchester Arena, or you have the Bataclan massacre by ISIS in Paris. I mean, the anti-terrorism laws really have nothing to say about these. They are there to suppress dissent, and they are using the very terrorism they created, because before Iraq's invasion, there was no ISIS, and before Western interference in Afghanistan, there was no Al Qaeda either. So the Western powers create the very terrorism that they then use as the excuse to clamp down on democratic rights. So I will be in court in January. I was also arrested last October after having given a speech at the picket outside Zippy Hotovely's residence. And I was arrested for saying that Israel today, I was simply quoting a Jewish Chronicle article on a speech that I made, or a comment I made at Palestine Expo, that Israel was Hitler's bastard offspring. But can we really suggest that that is anything is outrageous? Hitler pursued both in the invasion of Russia and also in the siege of the Jewish ghettos in Poland, a policy of death by hunger, the hunger plan. And that is exactly what Israel is doing today with Gaza, literally starving a civilian population in order apparently to defeat Hamas, though that itself is open to question. But it's not all doom and gloom. And I think the prescription of Palestine action has also shown the weakness, because, as Huda said, they've been taken aback by the protests, and they haven't died down. On the contrary, they've increased, and hopefully people will go up to London on the 6th of September, and we will, in our thousands, hold up banners saying we support Palestine action, and thus render the law incapable of being enforced. I think that is really important. And I have to say, to Palestine Solidarity Campaign, which I helped co-found, and which distanced itself from any action in support of Palestine action, that if they're not to be totally useless and futile and irrelevant to the struggle for Palestine in this country, that they should get behind those protests. And the same for Stop the War Coalition. There is no point holding massive national demonstrations through empty streets, which are totally ignored by the media, when there is a very real and living campaign against the attempts of the British state to clamp down on organisations like Palestine Action, because they pose a threat to British foreign policy in the Middle East. I mean, that's really what it's about. So I am hoping, if anyone here is in Palestine Solidarity, and if Ben Jamal is listening, that they will indeed reverse their position and not abstain from what is a living struggle. And on the prescription of Palestine action, I can't help but comment on Yvette Cooper, a despicable and pathetic woman that she is. On the very day that the prescription of Palestine action was laid before Parliament, she was dressed in the colours of the suffragettes, and she appeared along with other women on the Labour benches, proudly supporting the suffragettes. Anyone who knows anything of the history of the suffragettes knows that compared the Palestine action, compared to the suffragettes, are really just kindergarten children. The suffragettes bombed and burned their way for 2 or 3 whole years, from 1912 to 1914, bombing Lloyd George's house, throwing a hatchet at him, narrowly missing him and catching an Irish nationalist MP on the ear. They poured corrosive liquids in post office boxes. They attacked railways. I mean, compared to Palestine Action, they were a terrorist group in many ways. Yet today, the hypocrites on Labour's benches, not least our Home Secretary, are proud to stand with them. That just, I think, really tells you something about the nature of the people who oppose us. Uh, and I just want to say also about the prescription of Hamas, because Hamas was first prescribed, I think it was 2001, and then Priti Patel, one of the most corrupt and dishonest politicians we have, and there's a very fierce competition for that, was prescribed in November 21 by Priti Patel. That is the political wing was prescribed. And what that really means is that anyone who is a member of Hamas's political wing, be they a doctor, a teacher, a civilian worker, anyone who works in a job who has anything to do with the government and administration in Gaza, is called a terrorist. A nurse, a health worker, they are all terrorists on a par with those who are fighting in the tunnels. What that is, it means that Israel has, in its eyes and in the eyes of the West, a legitimate excuse to bomb and attack hospitals, schools, and any other civilian structure. In other words, the prescription of Hamas's political wing is a warrant for genocide, nothing less. It cannot be anything other. And I think in particular emphasis should be put on that. I think the prescription of Hamas's military wing is outrageous, of course, because it's a resistance movement, not a terrorist movement. But to prescribe the political wing of it, just imagine, for instance, that Sinn Féin had been prescribed in the 70s. Then the British Army would have had an excuse to presumably bomb the Royal Victoria Hospital in Belfast because some Sinn Féin member was having medical treatment. I mean, it is totally and utterly outrageous.
Would you conclude, Tony?
Yes,
please.
Yes, I will conclude because I'm sure I've gone over time. I just want to say one final thing in response to Frank about whether Zionism is fascist. I don't think Zionism in its origins and its, if you like, its political nature has been fascist over the ages. But what has happened is the revisionist strain, which was a fascist strain or strand within Zionism, has come to power. And we now see people who are open neo-Nazis really in the Israeli government. I mean, compared to Ben Gvir, Marine Le Pen is a socialist. I mean, it is quite absurd. These are really genocidal fascists, and we should treat them as such. So thank you very much. And I'm sorry if I've gone on a bit long.
Thank you very much, Tony. You have, but it was all well worth listening to, which is the most important thing. All of you, thank you. Before we start the Q&A, we have a number of questions that people placed on the Q&A list. Graham Ogden, if you could lift your electronic hand, we can let you ask the question yourself. Otherwise, please tell us and I will read it. Graham?
Oh, thanks, Haim. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Great. Question for Fatima's mum. I wondered what the reaction of Goldsmiths to your daughter's imprisonment was, and whether she's been able to continue her studies and examinations.
Sukaina, can you answer this?
Sure. From prison, obviously, she cannot continue her studies, but the university, as well as the student union at Goldsmiths University, has been quite supportive. They deferred her year for this whole past year while she was in prison. And obviously, there's no way she can start her studies or continue her studies this academic year as well. So I've applied to defer it this year as well, and just waiting to hear back on that. Hopefully that helps answer your question.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sukaina, and thank you, Graham. There is a question by someone who is not naming themselves. What will be the next steps if you lose the judicial review stage? I think, Frank, could you relate to that question?
I think it's more one for Huda, to be honest. I'm not instructed on that case per se. So I think maybe she's better placed to field it.
So what was the question? What would I do if we lost the judicial review?
Yes.
We probably appeal. It's the short answer. But I don't, I envision this is going to be a long fight. Hopefully not a long fight to be deprescribed, but I imagine, even if we win and do get deprescribed in the meantime, there is a likelihood that the state will probably appeal, especially if Yvette Cooper's still in power. Anything can happen. But I think ultimately, we can't just rely on one mechanism for deprescription, and that's why I think it's so important to defend our juries campaign. And we're not gonna give up until we're deprescribed one way or another. And to be honest, I think their case is pretty. It's pretty pathetic, to be honest. I've seen the papers in it. They get a lot of things wrong. It just seems full of errors, and there's a lot of lobbying behind the scenes, which we will see probably more of that coming to light. And I think it's been brilliant to see how many journalists have also taken it upon themselves to find out more information behind the prescription. I am pretty confident, but I know that you can't put your full faith in the legal system. But I have confidence in our legal team, but most of all, I have confidence in people, the people that are coming out on the streets, hopefully in their thousands next Saturday, to oppose this. And we've seen it before with the poll tax, when thousands of people resist, it will be inevitable that they have to overturn this prescription. So we can't put all of our eggs in one basket, but one way or another, I'm sure this is going to be defeated. And hopefully we'll end with Albert Systems having no choice but to leave the country, and also in Yvette Cooper, and hopefully more people losing their job, because this is just, it's a huge political mistake that she has made. I think she's already starting to realise that. And I think that's just going to come out stronger. She's resorted to a pathetic smear campaign in order to try and justify it. And the truth is coming out. More will come out, and I'm sure that we will prevail one way or another.
Thank you very much, Huda, and good luck with this case, of course. And the next question is to Frank again. Robert, could you pose your picture? Could you pose your question?
Just asking Robert to unmute.
Yeah, could you unmute, Robert?
Yeah, there he is.
Okay. Hi, that's really to Frank, and it's maybe been covered by partly by past questions there. But as a regular marcher protester, people get disheartened, and we will continue. But it feels very defensive. Is there, in my ignorance, can you tell me, Frank, is there a process by which we can challenge the British government in court over their misuse of the Terrorism Act?
I really agree with you. I agree with your point about it being too defensive. And I think that the time is ripe for us to go on the offensive. All I would say is that the Terrorism Act stuff, that's a bit more difficult. I mean, in some ways, Palestine Action is the most cutting edge offensive front in that struggle. And then obviously, my client, I represent Hamas to bring an application under Section 4. And that's something of an offensive strategy, right? It's like taking the case to the government. But I do think that the crucial strategic point that I always try to hammer home when thinking this stuff through with the comrades is that we need to subordinate any legal tactics to a prior political strategy. Look at what's happening with Palestine Action. Palestine Action, the attempts to ban Palestine Action will be defeated politically. There is a legal aspect to that challenge, but it is being defeated because of an extremely effective, well-coordinated political campaign. So lawyers, qualified lawyers can play some role, but ultimately what we need is a coordinated political movement. I really can't emphasize that enough. That's how we win. But beyond the Terrorism Act 2000, and I've suggested it should be abolished, and I think we should try to grow a campaign calling for its abolition. I do think that there are other ways we can take offensive legal action, and it's frustrating to me that more people aren't doing it. For example, many people have jobs and they work in workplaces where stuff has happened to do with Palestine, right? People the managers send around emails saying you're not allowed to wear Palestine badges anymore. Just sue them. Like if your employers put a foot wrong, just sue them. Just say you can't do this. This is racist against Palestinians. We had a bake sale for Ukraine. We have something about Black Lives Matter on our website. And yet when we talk about Palestine, we're being told, no, you're not allowed to talk about this. That's racist. It's contrary to the Equality Act. You can argue that you're being discriminated against or that it's anti-Palestinian harassment or whatever it is. Same with the police. Like I said, when the police put a foot wrong, sue them and do it in a really public way. And like I said, run the case in this extremely political way that escalates and says, well, the reason you're doing this is because you're committed to the fascist ideology of Zionism and you're committed to suppressing speech that criticizes it. I think we should be bringing offensive legal action in the High Court. We should be bringing judicial reviews. I've talked about this in other contexts. Professional regulators like the Solicitors Regulation Authority and the General Medical Council that regulates doctors, they're extremely vulnerable to a judicial review where we just go into court and say more or less similar things to what I've been saying on this call. It's like you're part of the British state. The British state is currently engaged in this genocide. You are suppressing anti-Zionist speech. You're engaged in anti-racist, anti-Palestinian racism. Like I absolutely think that we should be going on the offensive much more than we are. Partly that's an organization problem. Partly that's a learned helplessness problem. But I welcome your emphasis on the need to pivot from an overly defensive strategy to what should be 23 months into a genocide. We need to be going on the offensive, going into court with the explicit intention of causing maximum damage to Zionism and causing maximum damage to the British state's policy of staunch support for Zionism. That's my view.
Thank you, Frank. I think, sorry, Chaim. I just noticed that Mick's got his hand up.
Yeah.
Mick, did you want to comment on this as well?
I missed that. Yeah, Frank, absolutely. But here's the problem. Let's go to court and sue. Now, we've managed to extract a small sum of money from some Zionist smearers, but that was through their professional organization, a lawyer, or in another case, a teacher. But having been called Holocaust deniers and anti-Semites for a very, very long time, we've tried to take civil action, but we find when we go to a well-meaning, it's called defamation up here. We go to a well-meaning defamation lawyer. He says, look, we'll take your money, but you can't get into this game if it's less than 30 or 40 grand. So we can win, and we seize every opportunity in the criminal court. But I had always thought, because of that the civil route was pretty much closed off to us in view of the eye-watering sums of money.
Yeah, I hear that. And defamation is kind of a rich person's game, and it's mostly, you've been defamed in the Sun and 2 million people have read it, kind of thing. So we have to think very carefully before we use the sledgehammer of defamation proceedings, absolutely. But the Employment Tribunal is a so-called no-cost jurisdiction. Strictly, it's possible to get a cost order in the Employment Tribunal, but the starting point is that unless you've done something unreasonable, you won't be forced to pay the other side's costs if you sue them and lose. And it's a bloodbath. People are being fired because they've criticized the Zionist entity. People are being suspended. They're being subject to detriments. They're being told to take off badges and items of clothing, and they're told they're not allowed to wear keffiyehs. All this kind of stuff is happening in workplaces up and down the country. And that's the kind of thing that I'm talking about. We should go on the offensive there because it's low-hanging fruit. The risks are way lower. and it's very easy to publicize. It's also very relatable. It's very easy to get trade unions involved in that sort of stuff. So I absolutely hear what you're saying. Different types of case have different kinds of risks, and one of the risks is that you are forced to pay costs either to your own side or to the other side. And part of the problem is finding or increasing our capacity, so having more comradely lawyers who are doing it for the right reasons. So at least when it comes to the question of costs, your own side is not the one imposing the eye-watering fees. But I absolutely hear what you say. It's a problem to be solved. But broadly, I think things like the Employment Tribunal help us to get around that problem quite effectively. And think about David Miller's case was an Employment Tribunal case, right?
Esther, you're gonna take it over?
Yeah, I'll pick up the questions from here. Thank you, Chaim. So we had a question from Christina. Christina, do you want to ask your question to Huda?
Thanks very much, Esther. Yes, I had a question for Huda. Do you have any thoughts on whether the ban on Palestine action is linked with Britain's Ministry of Defence's imminently with their award of a 15-year contract to Elbit Systems?
Yeah, no, I definitely do. So for context, they're in the running with to win a £2 billion contract to train the vast majority of British soldiers, which is pretty insane. That's even being considered, considering the current genocide in Gaza and all of these targeted sanctions that the government has been, this facade of sanctions that they've been doing in order to try and appease the general public to make it look like they're doing something. The fact that they're considering giving a company which is the backbone of the Zionist regime a contract like this, which would tie them in for over a decade, with the core of the British military, is just insane in itself. But what's interesting is that they were chosen, as well as another group of companies, on February 11th, 2025 this year, and they were given £2 million to make their bid for the bigger contract. When we've seen now in the judicial review is that it turns out that it was on, sorry, my laptop was about to die. It was the day before the February 11th, on February 10th, the day before they gave them this £2 million to make this bid. That was when the day Yvette Cooper had decided to consider us for prescription. After waiting 2 months to make a decision on that, that's when she said, okay, let's look at Palestine Action for prescription, the day before that happened. And that's too great a coincidence for it to be absolutely meaningless. It seems that a lot of this is about, the whole thing is about commercial interests when you look at the basis of the prescription, which is about property damage to Israeli weapons factories. That's the sole basis of it. It's all about Elbit Systems. And Elbit Systems is up for potentially winning this contract. Palestine Action is a huge risk for that, in the sense of disruption towards their factories, etc. So it makes sense that they would want to try and get Palestine Action out of the way. I would like to hope that, considering what's happened since the prescriptions come into force, the strength of the movement behind it, the uncertainty of the upcoming judicial review, and the controversy around this, that they wouldn't go ahead with it. But there also seems to be a lot of corruption behind this deal, and a lot of dodgy dealings and breaking of the MOD rules. They hired someone very senior at the MOD at a time when it clashed with the rules to get that kind of expertise on board in order to try and gain an upper hand in the deal. So, Elbit is obviously being a company which is based on the destruction of Palestine and is engaged in the genocide, is not afraid of breaking international law or domestic law to get what they want. And so, yeah, I definitely think there's a definite link between the contract and the prescription.
Thank you, Huda.
Yeah, as has been said in the chat, follow the money. I'd like to just call David now to ask his question to Frank about the IHI definition. Go ahead, David.
Well, what I was wondering was if it is possible to challenge the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism on the grounds that it makes the criticism of a state impossible. And that has to be a breach of our human rights and against international law, I would have thought. But I would like your opinion on that.
Thanks, David.
Absolutely. Yeah, the IHRA definition, speaking of abolishing things, the IHRA definition should be abolished. I mean, if it ever had any use whatsoever, it's now completely degraded. Palestinians have been telling us that for years. I spoke about Corbyn briefly during my contribution. And in fairness to him, he tried to resist the NEC of the Labour Party passing the IHRA definition. But I remember at the time, a very broad coalition of Palestinian civil society organizations directly appealing to him and to the Labour Party saying, do not pass this definition. It is going to be used to stifle the apartheid state as it is ethnically cleansing us. So it's long been clear that the definition is not fit for purpose. It's designed, whether intentionally or otherwise, its function, its effect is to stifle legitimate criticism of the arguably fascist ideology, certainly racist ideology of Zionism and the apartheid state of Israel. So there are attempts to challenge it legally. It seems as that, again, I would encourage people to think politically rather than legally. I think Edinburgh University, for example, is thinking about de-adopting it. That's the route, in my opinion. Large institutions saying, you know what, we made a mistake by adopting this definition. We're de-adopting it. So that's the crucial strategic approach: is to pressure institutions to de-adopt. But as to legal challenges, they are starting to bear fruit. I was involved in a High Court case representing a solicitor who appealed the decision to strike him off, and the president of the High Court, who's incidentally overseeing the Palestine Action JR, handed down what was in some ways a very useful judgment that did damage to the three most egregious examples of the IHRA definition. And what the president of the High Court confirmed in that case is that you can call for Israel to be abolished. That's not anti-Semitic, and there's no reason, there's no even presumption that it is anti-Semitic. So pushing back against this, racist endeavor example, right? And he even confirmed that that in principle, and if done carefully, it's possible to draw comparisons between contemporary Israeli government policy and that of other fascist regimes, including Nazi Germany. So that's a binding High Court judgment that basically does a lot of damage to the IHRA definition, in my opinion. And again, I said that I think we should be going on the offensive and bringing offensive legal cases. It seems to me that a well-resourced group choosing the right claimant, good set of facts, should be bringing a judicial review challenging one of these regulators. And one of the grounds of any such challenge should be you cannot be relying on the IHRA definition anymore. That definition is completely broken. It's racist against Palestinians. It needs to be abolished. That's my view.
Yeah, and it's not even a definition. And over to Tony, I think you wanted to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, people forget that the IHRA defines itself as a non-legally binding instrument, and yet it's been adopted by all sorts of organisations, including the police. And I think we should be challenging, I mean, I've already done so in a complaint, that the police have no business adopting the IHRA, because what they're effectively saying is that anyone who supports Palestine solidarity and is anti-Zionist is anti-Semitic. And in their advice to officers, they specifically say that comparisons with Nazi Germany is offensive to Jewish people, the assumption being that all Jewish people are of one mind. So I really do think it needs to be challenged, not only legally, but politically. Most universities, under threat of defunding by Gavin Williamson, if you remember, in the last government, adopted the IHRA. And I think it's time, the time is more than ripe to now say it's about time that you de-adopted it, because what it's doing is saying that support for the Palestinians is inherently racist. It's denying their right to self-determination. So it is, we should be going on the offensive against the IHRA.
Yeah, it's becoming more and more apparent. Thank you, Tony. I'm trying to pick out people that haven't yet asked a question. Heina Mo, is that how you pronounce your name? Question for Sukaina, but I also just wanted to add Graham's comment to Sukaina, how much I admire what Fatima and the others have done, considering the cost of their freedom and education. If you could pass that on to her. So, Heina, would you like to ask your question to Sukaina, please? Well, maybe you're not Not able to speak. So if I can ask a question then, it's the question about the fact that Fatima's been in prison without charge longer than usual legal time. Isn't that itself something on which you should win?
Sure. So to clarify, they have been charged. It's being in prison
Okay.
without trial.
Yeah.
But again, the custody time limits for anyone in prison without trial is a maximum of 6 months.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, when terror laws come into place, or they're being abused, as is with the Filton case, then everything else falls, and the like we've seen here with the Filton's imprisonment for over a year now. Many of them will be in prison for up to 2 years, before they stand trial, because of the counter-terror laws and the abuse of them by the government. It's led to this, and the safeguarding would then, would not apply in their case, because the counter-terror laws would take precedence, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. I've got a question from Bernie. Bernie, are you able to ask your question? I think you're directing your question to Tony.
Yeah. Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Thank you. Go ahead.
Hi. Yeah, I've actually I did have some exchange with Tony via email on this topic. And what I was concerned about was that if we look back at the history of what happened with the sort of disciplinary, looking at the Labour Party as a two sort of, the Socialist Labour Party and the Parliamentary Labour Party was a schism, whereby we had on the right-hand side all these reactionary right-wing Zionist type people, and making sure that the likes of Graham Bash and Tony and Jackie Walker and Mark Wadsworth, Ken Livingstone and others were exiled from the party on the grounds of their purported anti-Semitism. And my worry is that the very excellent blog Tony wrote about Zara, why will Corbyn be appeasing them? Yes, we will have a rerun of what's this. Is my question.
Okay.
What measures can be taken? My question is, what measures can be taken? I mean, this party represents the most existential threat to the establishment in years. Even more than the Corbyn party and Momentum. And I'm just wondering
what can be done before it's too late?
There's going to be people active in the party who are with masters of the dark arts. So I'll put this over to Tony. So if you'd like to respond to that, Tony.
Yeah, if we can link that with Chris's question as well, Tony.
Well, the first thing I'd like to say is that the new party, which still hasn't got a name, but has got 850,000 people signing up to it, is an extremely important initiative. And we should ensure that it's not torn apart in, if you like, disputes which don't need to take place. I think there is overwhelming support for the Palestinians in the new Your Party. Corbyn, in his usual muddle-headed fashion, has refused to call himself an anti-Zionist, but he does have a long history of support for the Palestinians. And I think we don't need to get tied up in a form of words. What matters is the reality of the positions you adopt. Corbyn supports the right of return of the Palestinian refugees. That in itself would mean an end to the Jewish state. He is still supporting two states, and I think it's quite clear that the new party does need to adopt a position that it doesn't support any ethno-nationalist state. It supports, like in South Africa, a unitary democratic secular state, and that is quite important. no one in South Africa would have supported in the anti-apartheid movement a white state and a black state. So why in Palestine are some people still harboring the illusion that you can have a Jewish state and a Palestinian state? I think that is the really important battle. But I have no doubt that although it's had an easy ride so far, the new party is going to come under sustained attack. And so we have to be prepared for that in advance. I certainly think some of Corbyn's old advisors, Carrie Murphy in particular, also James Schneider, who failed abysmally to actually deal with the anti Semitism onslaught of the Zionists, need to be replaced. I don't think they have that much to offer in terms of advice, and they would be well to take a back seat. So, that, if you like, is my position on the new party. But it is an important initiative, and it does pose a real challenge to the existing parties, bearing in mind that the Tories and the Labour Party are really down in the polls, and in fact, the new party is on level pegging, according to some polls, with Starmer's Labour Party. So I'd like to see us finish off the Labour Party once and for all, and have a truly left-wing socialist party as the alternative.
Thank you, Tony. And I think what we're going to do now, there are some questions remaining, but we would like to ask all of the panelists to provide their closing comments on the discussion we've had this evening, and perhaps if they can answer any remaining questions, albeit briefly. So I'm going to invite all the panelists now to take the stage, as it were. And if you can each speak for around 1 minute, summarising what you've heard this evening, and take it so that people can take final views from you away from this meeting. So, and if you can speak in the order in which you appeared as well. So I'll call Sukaina first, if that's okay, and we'll continue from there. Thank you.
Thanks, thanks, Esther, for the opportunity, and it was a really interesting evening, I must say. I've learned lots by listening to everyone speak, and I would say that I have come away hopeful, if that's the right word, that we're going to win this. You know, like Huda said, might take some time, but eventually we should be the ones on the side of victory. And just to the audience, just wanted to sort of remind you of the two takeaway bits that I did mention in my talk. One about the campaign that we have against Elbit and reporting Elbit for war crimes. I did put in the link in the chat. So if you could kindly support us, it literally takes 30 seconds to send a letter reporting Elbit for war crimes. And I think this is extremely important right now with the Ministry of Defense about to give them the 2.5 billion pound contract to train our soldiers. So I think this should hopefully halt something somewhere. If a full-blown investigation is unleashed on Elbit. And secondly, the trials are coming up. Fatma Zainab's trial is in November 2025. So do continue to raise awareness about the Filton 24, continue to speak about them, share about them on your socials, and most importantly, be there to offer your solidarity and support outside the courts. The trial will be at Woolwich Crown Court starting on the 17th of November for the first group of 6 activists. So please do come and support us, come and show the government, the CPS, that there is massive support for the group, and you know, we're not going to take this quietly. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you, Sukaina. We're going to go on to Mick now. I noticed a comment from Eric in the chat. Of course, we are extremely distressed by the number of innocent children killed. And what you're asking is that we launch an immediate demanding immediate action from the UN or similar. So if we can bear that in mind, perhaps. Over to you, Mick, please.
Yeah, a couple of things. One, there's no point complaining that the BBC behaves the way it does. I mean, it is what it is. It's a state propaganda organization. We are facing full spectrum repression, and it's not just governments. For example, the educational system, schools, local educational authorities inhibit, prevent, demean, or attack children or parents who want to raise the issue of Palestine in their classrooms, thinking naively that we did it for Ukraine, therefore we can do it for Palestine. You can't, because it won't be allowed. So I think these are areas of struggle, and I think we should think about how we can mobilize there, because there's schools all over the place. There are angry parents everywhere, and there are some children who might want to discuss Palestine. But the full spectrum nature of the repression is beginning to wear off. It was great to see Kneecap. It was great to see Bob Villan. We saw examples which could not be easily controlled by the authorities, where pro-Palestine feeling broke through. And I think that's where we are at the moment. The repression for the last few years has been intense. It's beginning to wear thin. People are beginning to realize that they can fight back. And although there's a special opportunity in some football stadiums and in concerts, that general feeling of the need to oppose the repression is widespread. We need to think of ways, channels, whereby people can be energized to actually do it. And I think obviously there's an electoral aspect to this, but electoral politics don't easily make it easy to raise issues like Palestine. People are concerned about health service, some are concerned about bloody immigrants and so on, all sorts of garbage. And to raise the issue in a general election is very difficult. We have to do it, but I think given the rotten nature of virtually the whole political establishment, the British Medical Association bearing down on people, and educational institutions, we're dealing with a full-scale systemic repression. And I think people need to draw the appropriate conclusions, and they might well merit the description, some revolutionary conclusions, that we need to see ourselves as taking on an entire system rather than just a few bad apples.
Yeah.
In Scotland recently, although the cops are on a hair trigger, there was a demonstration in Falkirk, and a filthy creature, was there holding a banner saying "Kill them all." Police Scotland have taken no action whatsoever. Cops are standing alongside them smiling. So it's not a level playing field. We're up against an entire system. We can win, but it's going to be one hell of a tough fight.
Absolutely, Mick. Thank you. Over to you, Huda.
Thank you. Yeah, I just start with something I forgot to mention, which I feel is quite important. One of the Filton 24, T. Hoxer, who's been on remand since November last year and is on trial in April next year, has this is her 20th day of being on hunger strike, and her medical situation has deteriorated. And she's only been demanding very basic things, including being able to have her recreational activities reinstated, having her library job returned, and to have her withheld mail given to her, a lot of which are already rights that she is supposed to have, but she has been attacked by the prison system, especially after prescription has happened. She has met 2 out of 3 demands, and a lot of people have been calling into HMP Peterborough and emailing in to make sure that those demands are met. So if people can continue to do that, and also just to keep raising the profile of what's happening in British prisons, because there are 33 people inside prison, and they are facing, harsh treatment and are being labelled as terrorists by the British state. So I just wanted to raise that. I want to thank everyone. There's been an incredible amount of support over the years for Palestine Action, but really seeing how much it's grown, you really see how many allies you have, and that's what gives you faith. And all of us who've been affected by this, faith that we are going to win, and that we are a strong movement, and that they've picked the wrong battle, and that they are going to lose this. And so And I would just make one final comment because I can't help myself. But I do believe it should be quite an easy thing at this point, 2 years into a genocide, to say you are anti-Zionist. And I do find it quite disappointing and frustrating when that hasn't happened. I have to say, it is quite basic. And I also think it's just frustrating to see how can a new party start on that foot when we're not willing to be different this time and more forthcoming with what we actually believe in. But I think that we can't just rely on electoral politics, like Mick said. We have to fight on the streets. We have to keep taking the types of action that we can take and resisting against the state in many different ways and not put all of our eggs in one basket.
Thank you very much, Huda. Absolutely. And we're going to go on to Richard now for his closing comments.
Yeah, it's been great listening to everyone, and I'd like to underscore some of the things that we heard. I wholeheartedly agree with everything Frank outlined about offensive action. You know, that's something that ironically the Zionists have understood very well and manipulated and used as a very effective strategy to silence their adversaries when they're not killing them, of course. So you know, there is a lesson somewhere in there that we should be using legal challenges. We should be using all the tools at our disposal to fight back and not just kind of, you know, take this lying down and just roll over. That's not going to work. And like Huda said, you know, we should. This goes back to a security strategy, right? Compartmentalization, not putting all your eggs in one basket. Whether it's electoral politics, whether it's legal challenges in the courts, whether it's direct action, whether it's operational security, cybersecurity, I really think this should be a multifaceted approach that we're using, and we should make good use of it. And yes, of course, it's I'm following, of course, the debate about Jeremy and so on, and I've kind of avoided opining about it because I'm just waiting to see how it goes. But it's very impressive the numbers they have. And you know, obviously, I would like to see them adopt a more anti-Zionist, a very clear anti-Zionist position. I mean, I'm in Vienna, and if I can do it here, you can definitely do it in England. So there shouldn't be any qualms about that, especially after the last 2 years. So also for court dates, you know, I want to help get people out for everyone's court dates. So if you guys can email me or contact me with specific court dates that you want me to post about, that you want me to you know, basically raise awareness about, please do that so I can help as much as I can, so we can use my reach to get people actually into the streets in front of the courts. I remember how effective that was for Julie and how important it was. So I'm at your disposal.
Thank you so much for that, Richard. We'll have to pass on those contact details to attendees. Thank you. Over to you, Frank.
Comrades, it's been emboldening to share this space with you. Obviously, it is still a genocide, and so we need to continue escalating our opposition to the genocide and to the genocidal ideology of Zionism that's animating it. And in particular, those of us in Britain have to escalate our opposition to our government's own participation in it. I'll just reiterate some of the things that I said. The Terrorism Act 2000 is an extremely draconian, full frontal assault on everyone's right to free expression. And there seems to be a political revolution occurring against Zionism. And part of that political revolution, in my opinion, should include the explicit call for the Terrorism Act 2000 to be abolished. I think we need to explore the link between the broader emergence of contemporary 21st century fascism and the specific degeneration of Zionism. It seems as though Zionism is in a crisis, that's undeniable, and it's for us to ensure that it's a terminal crisis. And then finally, in my opinion, we should be going on the offensive against Zionism. I think it's extremely weak. It's not capable of defending itself. It can't defend itself against the military blows that are being directed at it, both on October 7th and with all of these missile strikes from Iran and all the rest of it. But also, crucially, ideologically, it can't defend itself. So I think find ways to go into court and do maximum damage to Zionism, find ways to persuade anyone that you know that we should be loudly proclaiming our commitment to the anti-Zionist cause. And let's just create, I think cultural spaces is an underappreciated front in this struggle. Just create spaces where it's considered normal to be anti-Zionist, so that if any Zionists want to come into those spaces, they understand that they're for once that they're on enemy terrain and that Zionists are all pariahs now. They're not really welcome in sort of ordinary society because they've aligned themselves with an explicitly racist ideology that's responsible for a genocide.
Thank you, Frank. I think we're illustrating very well the multifaceted approach that a number of you have referenced. So finally, before I hand back to Chaim, a minute from you, Tony.
Okay, I mean, I think it's disappointing that Corbyn hasn't come out as an anti-Zionist, but that is the situation. I think it's what is more important is that the party itself adopts a clear anti-Zionist position, even if its leader or its co-leader cannot. As regards Zionism, I agree with Ilan Pappy. I think we're seeing the beginning of the end of Zionism. Zionism was unlike apartheid in South Africa. It had immense political support in the West. It's now lost the battle of the narrative. It's now revealed itself to be what it is, which is a genocidal ideology and movement. And I think we have to pick up on that and drive that lesson home. And as Frank has said, we have to marginalize Zionism everywhere and its supporters. And I think that will become increasingly easy. In Brighton, the Zionists held a small march through the town. And it was quite amazing the way they were heckled and jeered by just ordinary people on the streets. That would never have happened in the past. The tide has turned and it's in our favour. It will go out in a violent death throw, but it is on its way out. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tony. Normalising anti-Zionism. Finally, back to you, Chaim.
Thank you very much, all of you, for your excellent contributions to the struggle against Zionism and against this criminal government, which is continuing to support it after a whole century of crimes. Jewish Network for Palestine always was and will continue to be an anti-Zionist organization. We've said this quite openly, and we will continue to work against Zionism. Not only that, Tony and myself were some of the many speakers at the first Jewish anti-Zionist Congress in Vienna, where Zionism was started. And the next anti-Zionist Congress, Jewish anti-Zionist Congress, is called for Dublin and will be taking part in less than a year. And we intend to build an anti-Zionist movement across the globe like the anti-apartheid movement once was. And remember, nobody had a problem with being anti-apartheid. Now, apartheid was really a gentle movement in comparison to the crimes of Zionism. So I don't know what our good friend Jeremy Corbyn finds so difficult in saying, I'm an anti-Zionist. It's basically calling racists and genociders and naming their crimes. And the crime did not start on the 7th of October. So I hope that the new party and Jeremy will follow Zara Sultana and the many, many thousands of socialists and radicals in Britain and join the anti-Zionist camp. Thank you for all the speakers, and thank you for over 200 people who are marvelous, asked the right questions and demanded the right answers. We have got a lot to think about after today in terms of action and how we fight to defeat all aspects of Zionism in Britain.
Thank you. Good night.
And this webinar, like any other, will be available on the JNP website and on SLN. I don't.
Yes,
yeah?
yes, it will.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, and thank you all for taking part. We will close now. Thank you very much.
Yep. Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you.